To talk about that decision and all of the news out of Washington is Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger. Congressman Kinzinger represents Illinois' 16th Congressional District, which spans from the Wisconsin border down through the far western suburbs and around to Indiana. You should know that we invited Illinois' entire Republican congressional delegation, but Congressman Kinzinger was the only lawmaker to accept our invitation, and for that we thank you.
You bet.
And first of all, Congressman, what is your reaction to the appellate court's decision?
Well, it's mixed. This is the most overturned appellate court out there. The second thing is, in hearing some of the rationale saying that they don't see a national security threat, my concern on that is that's not really the court's decision to say. But in the executive order in the larger sense, I've been very critical of it. I think a president has a right, a new president has a right to say, we want to check our vetting standards to make sure we're being safe. But this thing was rushed. It was ill thought out. There were a lot of people caught up that shouldn't have been caught up. And if you look at the list of countries on this executive orders, for instance, Syria makes a little bit of sense, right? Somalia makes a little bit of sense. But Iraq, Iraq is our chief ally right now in fighting ISIS. They have some of the toughest vetting standards because we built their passport system after the invasion. And so it was a very rushed procedure, and I hope the administration thinks hard as they figure out how to go the next step here.
Speaking of Iraq, you wrote a letter to the president asking for an exemption for certain Iraqis. What was the request, and what has happened as a result of that?
Well, nothing's happened, and I'll say this has been an issue I've been fighting for 6 years, even under the Obama administration. There are translators in Iraq and Afghanistan that worked with American soldiers, put their lives on the lines. Many actually died in this process, that were promised the ability to come to the United States as a result. It's a commitment we made to them that have been caught up in the bureaucracy of State Department and concerns about terrorism. They should be vetted, obviously, but the concern is, look, there are a lot of translators that were promised us that have died because they haven't gotten that. Taliban have attacked, ISIS have attacked them, and so this is an important exemption, no matter what the president does in terms of future vetting standards, I think, for our country to say promises made need to be promises kept.
You met with the Iraqi ambassador, what was it, yesterday?
Yeah, a couple days ago.
And what did the Iraqi ambassador say to you about this ban?
Well, he was very concerned. He made the statement that, look, we are your chief ally right now in defeating your main enemy, ISIS. He said there are a number of reactions out of Iraq. The one that concerns him the most is there are some people that are very excited about this because they have an interest in destroying the relationship between Iraq and the United States. Iranians, for instance, some of the radicals in Iraq. And he said that was the thing that concerned him the most. So, as a congressman, we're trying to send the message to the Iraqi people that we're allied with them, we appreciate them and their sacrifice, and we hope the administration follows suit.
So what is your hope for what the ultimate disposition, the ultimate decision will be on this whole issue of travel from those countries?
Well, again, I think as far as how the court system goes, anybody can quarterback that, play that out, I don't know. What I hope the administration does is takes a step back and says, okay, this executive order was rushed. It's right to review our vetting standards. We can do that without an executive order. We can make sure the folks coming here are not going to be a threat to the United States while maintaining our great tradition of saying we are a welcoming country. So my hope is, however this ends up, that's the final result.
This issue has gotten so much attention recently. It's taken focus away from an issue that was previously of considerable concern and still is in many quarters, and that is the potential Russian involvement in the election. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's a big concern. I think we have to separate when people talk about Russian hacking. I don't think Russians hacked into the election boxes and created different results. But what they did do and what they're doing in Europe and what they seek to do is what they did back in the old Soviet Union, which is misinformation. You look at fake news, for instance, a story that's created on Facebook, retweeted or posted by a bunch of different organizations so that it pops up on your news feed the second you open Facebook, and it's completely false. That's fake news. The other issue, though, is hacking into an election system. We all have private emails, and we should have a right to have private conversations, but exposing those to try to influence an election. So I believe that Donald Trump was elected by the majority of people in the right states to make him president. I don't take away from his election at all. He tapped into a sentiment that people have. But I think any attempt of Russian involvement has to be stopped because we are not a former Soviet republic. We are the United States of America, and we won't be pushed around by a country with an economy the size of Italy.
Are you concerned about the president's defense of Russia?
I am, and I've been critical about the words. For instance, the words a few days ago about the moral equivalency between Vladimir Putin and the United States, saying we've done some bad things too. It reminds me of the so-called apology tour in President Obama's early administration. But the actions of the administration have been different than the president's words. The president did reaffirm NATO in front of some cadets he spoke to. You had Nikki Haley's speech to the UN where she said that the sanctions are going to maintain in place until Russia leaves Crimea. And so those things have been good, but in terms of the words, we're going to have to, and as a member of Congress, I have a responsibility to call out when that violates American policy.
As a member of Congress, you will also have to pass in some form or another on the whole question of building a border wall. Do you support it?
Well, I do. I think, it was a promise that the president made. I support border security. I have worked the border as a pilot in the Guard. Now, what does that look like? Is it a wall or is it a fencing with strong security? Well, that'll be a decision to be made. But I think what comes next is very important. Once you have border security, once the American people believe that the border is secure, then we need to go to steps 2 and 3. Let's fix our broken immigration system for the long run. You have millions of people that are here illegally. They're not going to all be deported. So let's figure out a pathway for to be able to get on the rolls, pay taxes, and everything else. And I think a process of a comprehensive immigration reform after border security is where we need to go.
Are you concerned about the United States alienating its allies and trade partners, Mexico, Canada, Australia?
I am. Look, we're in a very different time. We have a president that was elected on a very different agenda than what I as a Republican am used to, and I pay a lot of attention to foreign policy. It's one thing to be tough, and I think a president should be tough. We're seeing the president push back against Iran finally, which I think is very important. But Mexico is one of our chief trading partners. Canada, Australia, the Pacific. When we turned down TPP, we actually gave a lot of ground to the Chinese. So my hope is the administration enters bilateral negotiations with some of these countries. So I am concerned, but some of the actions I've seen have actually been reassuring in the long run.
Another big agenda item for you as a congressman is going to be what to do about the Affordable Care Act,
right.
Obamacare, the whole issue of repealing it and replacing it. Your thoughts on that?
So it's a very difficult process. This can be repealed with 51 Senate votes. It can only be replaced in total with 60 Senate votes because of the process. Americans, some on the left are trying to get us to show us 3,000-page replacement bill, and that's what we're not going to do. We're not going to roll out a bill that you can't read, that you don't know what's in it. But what we want to do is get into that process. So in the committee, in my committee, for instance, in the Healthcare Subcommittee, which I don't serve on, they're in the process of crafting what this repeal looks like, what the replacement looks like. The one thing that we are committing to that is not going to happen, we're not going to pull healthcare away from 30 million people. Some will try to convince folks of that, but the reason we're taking our time, the reason we're being cautious, is we want to do it right. People's premiums have skyrocketed. Their deductibles have skyrocketed. I hear it all the time from people in my district. We want to fix this and make it right.
Is Congress feeling pressure from the White House, though? The White House wants, and at least certainly gave the appearance of wanting a very expedited schedule.
Yeah, well, look, we're waiting to see exactly what the president's presenting us. We're doing our work in the House and Senate. We're going to do that in a joint way. The president has a very ambitious agenda. He's followed through on a lot of his agenda items in just 3 weeks. So in terms of feeling pressure, no, because we want to do this right. And the last thing we'll do is succumb to any pressure on the left or right. We want to do this right for the American people.
I'm wondering what impact the president's, are you concerned that White House statements that are verifiably false is going to make it harder for Republicans to do work on important issues like the Affordable Care Act and what will follow from that? The question being, if the White House loses its credibility, it can potentially impact the Republican Party's credibility. Is that an issue for you?
I was always concerned. Look, truth matters. And where I've become concerned is on the left and on the right, and frankly everywhere in between, people have only started to accept news that they agree with. Long as the day gone, it seems, where people can watch something they disagree with and try to learn from it, whether it's a news show or anything, or somebody with a need to get back, I think, to saying, I want to hear what the other side has to say. Both sides have great ideas. How we get to that ultimate goal is going to do that. And so when a president or a leader, frankly, from the other party comes out and says verifiably untrue statements, I think it's harmful for the long-term productivity and long-term benefit of this country.
Do you sense that your colleagues are hesitant about speaking out against the president for fear of reprisals, for fear of a 3 a.m. tweet and that sort of thing?
The 3 a.m. tweet. I don't know if it's anything out of fear. I think, look, he's the president. This is, our party has unified control. From that perspective, it's exciting as a Republican to see some of the agenda items we've talked about and having an opportunity to do this. The president has a honeymoon period right now, or he should, doesn't feel like it much. And so there are folks that are standing by waiting to see what does tax reform look like, what does health care look like, what does the future of this country look like under a Republican administration. But I will tell you, my colleagues, while they may be hesitant to speak out on some things now, they understand what I understand, which is I represent 700,000 people. I'm an American before I'm a Republican, and I represent those people before I represent my party.
You have been criticized in some quarters as being a rhino, a Republican in name only. How do you respond to that criticism?
Well, look, I'm pragmatic. I'm a conservative. If I could, write the agenda and get everything done I wanted to do, it would be a very conservative agenda. But I'm pragmatic. I recognize in a country with two parties representing 300 million people, you're not always going to get what you want. And your choice is either to shut down government and go home and take your ball and go home, or it's to try to regain the narrative and get together as a country again. And so, some people can perceive that as somehow being weak on conservatism. I see it as trying to advance conservatism, advance this country, advance the future. And, look, I'm here to do what I think is right. That's what I was elected for. And I'll never waver from that because, frankly, this job would not be worth doing if you couldn't be true to who you were.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thanks so much for joining us tonight. We very much appreciate it.
You bet. Thank you very much.